If you don't adjust for inflation, Steven Spielberg is the most commercially successful director in film history. So suck it, Marvel. He is objectively the number one, but how does that align with his subjective view of himself? I think it's fair to say that the answer to that question wasn't the only surprise we found with his type. Holly and I have been practicing to type objectively for the past several years, and more recently we started typing additional celebrities while getting coached by Shan from Objective Personality. And that means, yes, the type that we reveal in this video has been confirmed by Shan and Dave. We're making these videos because we want to share our journey, the mistakes we make, the lessons we learn from the perspective of the student to help you with typing too. Before Holly and I started typing Steven, I had never watched any interviews with him, but of course, as most people watching, I grew up watching his movies. So in my mind, I went back to look for clues about his type in the movies, because as we know, it's the director's type who is most reflected in the movies itself. I felt relatively sure that he was probably an observer, because the movies show that he's obsessed with chaos and control and discovering hidden mysteries. Also thought less confidently that possibly maybe he's an EP, maybe lead SE, because among other things, his movies are really famous for spectacular action scenes.
So Steven was your choice for typing this month, and I had obviously seen his movies, but I had also never watched an interview with him, so I actually had no bias. I will also admit that I had never even seen a picture of him, so I also had no visual bias either. But as Felix said, just based on the types of movies that he made, I thought that there was a chance he may be an observer, but fortunately my biases did stop there, and that actually helped me with typing him. So the first coin we're going to look at is observer decider. So we're going to look at what is Steven actually stuck on and what is he the most afraid of. The following clip is audio only, so make sure you listen carefully. But in this clip, he is talking about recreating a movie scene that he found particularly terrifying.
Well, you know, I don't know, because remember, I'm a kid, and I think that when I saw that movie for the first time, and I had a Lionel electric train set, and by actually crashing the train into things and watching the train derail and watching the passenger cars and a couple of box cars and a caboose pile up, I was able to, I think, intuitively wrest back control of my fear. And I really think it helped assuage the fear. It helped me get in total control over it. So I was the one causing something that was going to maybe have a chance to scare other people, but no longer myself. And the idea of taking my dad's little Kodak Brownie 8mm movie camera and filming it was only because I kept wrecking the trains, crashing them into things, and my dad and mom threatened to take the train set away. So the idea of using a camera to film it, then I could watch the film over and over again, and it would essentially, you know, it would calm me down.
What else were you afraid of as a child?
Everything. There was nothing that didn't scare me. I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of this horrible New Jersey, this horrible, scary, naked tree out the window that looked like it had tentacles, you know, and it looked like these horrible branches, and it looked like arms and long fingers and long fingernails, and the tree terrified me. Later, as an adult, when I wrote Poltergeist, I created a tree out the window that actually comes to life and grabs a kid and starts to suck him into one of its knotholes, its sappy knotholes, and that was a direct steal from that tree out my window that scared me. I was afraid of the dark. I was, you know, I was afraid of small places, and I still am today. I'm very claustrophobic, but I was a fearful kid.
So when asked what he was afraid of, Steven claims that he was afraid of everything. So you'd think, okay, if you're afraid of everything, then you must be afraid of people too, right? No. Well, he doesn't mention people. He doesn't mention judgment. He mentions creepy trees outside the window and being afraid of things in the dark.
And being claustrophobic.
So these are more likely observer things. These are not what we would consider deciders to be afraid of. I mean, sure, as a decider, you may be afraid of the dark, you may be afraid of creepy trees, but that's not the worst thing for you. It's definitely people, and it's definitely judgment. So this is more likely observer fears, so we think Steven is more likely to be an observer. The other thing that he also mentions is that he has been wrestling with control issues ever since he was a kid. So he makes scenes where he captures destructive things happening, and then he likes to watch them over and over again, and that helps him get over the trauma of this, I guess, chaos control situation.
Makes him feel in control.
It does, yeah. So again, this is sort of more observer issues, chaos control observer issues that we're seeing here.
What was the hardest time for you in the school that you remember?
Well, it was just that period, I think, of probably junior high, I would say, in about 7th, 8th grade, and also some high school. I think junior high. Kids, before they start to see themselves from, the point of view of others, can be really, really harsh, really mean. Yeah. And they can't help it, and they don't even know they're being mean.
Exactly, yeah.
So as an adult, I can look back and I don't have any...
They don't realize the damage they're doing.
I have no resentment or anything to what I went through as a kid, because I kind of understand it.
Sure.
But at the same time, I think it was those junior high school years that were the hardest for me.
Yeah.
In this interview, Stephen talks about being bullied when he was a kid for being dyslexic, which he didn't find out he actually had dyslexia until much later on in life. But as you see in this clip, he is able to clearly understand that kids are mean, but that it's just something that happens with kids, and most kids grow out of it, and he doesn't actually hold any resentment towards them for it. So this is double deciding. He's not stuck on one perspective or the other. If he were a decider, he would be probably holding a grudge for the rest of his life over that one kid that said something mean to him back when he was 5 years old. So not the case.
So now we know that Steven Spielberg is an observer, but what is his lead function? I said in the beginning that I went in with the bias that I thought he might be lead SE, but I was also aware that this bias was simply based on an anecdote that I couldn't trust. I need to go in there and actually look at him and try to figure it out and see what he is and gather proper proof. In the case of Steven, I could have easily fallen for the savior sensory anecdotes, because when he talks, most of the time he doesn't really leave the planet. I can easily enough follow him. He's a really good verbal, intuitive storyteller. And when he talks, he gives a good amount of tangible information. He really takes you along. But I caught my bias by paying attention to the cross-checks, because if he has Savior SE, then he would have also NI somewhere in the stack, even if it's last. So I would see it eventually in just how he processes information. But instead, I actually saw something else.
I never thought about the degree of violence I was willing or able to interpret and show an audience. I shot this movie more intuitively than I've ever shot any movie in my life. And when I was not using my mind, and I wasn't intellectualizing, or I wasn't, wrestling with, should I do it this way or that way, but the ideas were coming to me so naturally, and there was no effort for me to know what I wanted to do next during a shooting day. It just seemed to happen. Every shot just seemed to be the only shot that was possible to really tell the truth about that dramatic moment. And so it's one of the few times I've made a movie where I can look back on it and say, I didn't plan anything. It just came out of me, and it came out of everybody. Ralph Fiennes, Liam Neeson, Ben Kingsley. I think all of us, that story allowed all of us to tap into our intuitive, selves to be the best we could be in those moments.
NI and an E are two very different ways of using intuition. NI is a very top-down way of planning, so it jumps all the way to the end and then backtracks from there. Yeah. While an E is kind of looking at multiple possibilities to extend the current sensory one step further. Yeah. And he talks about how he made his movie Schindler's List, but he talks about other movies and different interviews in the exact same way, that he just goes step by steps and he looks for multiple ideas that he's talking about and works in that way very intuitively. What can we do next on this day? So he doesn't come in with everything planned out in an intuitive way all the way to the end. He uses intuition step by step, so it doesn't look like he has an eye anywhere in the stack. So this made me stop and rethink my initial bias. Could he actually be on the SI-NE axis? But let's take a look at another clip.
No, there's no rules. There's a law of science. I don't believe there's a law of cinema. I think rules tend to, tend to stagger and topple people who really dream and are dreamers. I think it's. You
think that's where it all comes out of?
I think it all movies are dreams. They really are. They're daydreams that you often get bad grades over when you're not concentrating on the schoolwork. And you grow up being a daydreamer like I did, and then someday you take those daydreams, you turn them into something. I think that cinema is a very, very, very personal, highly interpretive extension of an idea which is invisible, and then you've got to somehow make it physical.
In this clip, he starts off by saying that there are no rules for filmmaking in cinema. Okay, there might be rules and signs, I guess, that you have to follow because you have no choice, but it's different with cinema. He really appreciates that cinema gives you possibilities for creating dreams, for expressing yourself. So he's really talking in a very calm, obvious, savior state about like how he's looking for options and possibilities and doing things in new ways. And he's also talking about intuition and dreams and bringing things to life. And it's also very important to note that he's not just talking about these things. This is his actual life that he's been doing for decades, bringing dreams to life.
And he's also framing freedom as a positive. Steven is, in fact, an EP with lead and E. So the next coin that we want to look at is DI versus DE. So what can Demon DI not do? Well, Demon DI can know itself, and it can make decisions based on its own preferences. It can't make its own decisions in a savior state. The demon state might express itself in a form of not allowed, but it can also express itself in giving the tribe's perspective and qualifying its own decisions.
You shoot it in black and white.
Yes.
What was the thinking about that?
I was the only one that wanted to shoot the picture in black and white. The studio didn't. Sid was fine with it, but everybody under Sid was saying, how do we sell cassette? No one thought the film was going to make any money. And they were going to go ahead and give me $20 million to go to Poland to tell the story, which I knew was going to be over 3 hours long. And they were doing it knowing that it was more of a public service message, less of a commercial enterprise. But they were hoping they would make some money when they sold the cassettes, because there was a huge sort of, ancillary market for movies in those days, not anymore. And but they didn't think they could sell a cassette if it was in black and white. And at one point that they were negotiating with me, they said, shoot it in color, we'll release the film in black and white, but then we'll release the cassette in color. And I said, no, I don't know the Holocaust in color. I wasn't around then, but I've seen documentaries on the Holocaust. And anybody who's seen any documentaries, they're all shot in black and white. It's my only reference point. And
You wanted this to feel real.
I wanted it to feel real, and the only reference point we had, it was contextualized in black and white for anybody that watched a documentary on it.
Now, we did initially interpret this clip as an example for Savior DI because Steven did end up going with his decision for shooting Schindler's List in black and white, while most of the tribe was actually against that idea. However, what you'll see here is that he doesn't express his preferences in a savior state. He is aware of the tribe's perspective and he does articulate it very easily. And it is the first thing that he talks about when the interviewer asks him, what was your thinking around that? He goes straight to the tribe's perspective, what everyone else thought, what everyone else wanted. But then he did, in the end, make the decision to go with what he wanted. And he had his personal reasons for why he wanted to do that. So I've just indicated that he might be a savior DE. So let's have a look and see if we can see a little bit more DE from him, a little bit more proof.
And I made a little Western called Gunsmog. And I'm really dating myself because, of course, James Arness and Gunsmoke was all the rage on television in those days. And I made this little Western with my sisters and my friends and my next-door neighbors and some of the Boy Scouts. And everybody had cowboy suits because we lived in Arizona, my goodness, And so we all brought our cowboy suits out, and I made this little Western movie and showed it to the Boy Scout troop on a Friday night when we had a meeting, and they went ballistic. They were screaming and clapping and laughing, both with and at the movie. I didn't care. It was a response. And the response set me on fire. It absolutely set me on fire, and I never wanted to live without some kind of affirmation, some kind of collective feedback. And maybe that's why my early movies were all about you. My early movies were all soliciting you, making you my partners, thinking about you behind the camera, thinking what would turn you on, what would get you excited, what would make you laugh, what would make you scream, How could I create suspense out of whole cloth when that darn shark never worked? And you were my partners. My audience, I collaborated with you and you collaborated with me, and I think the beginning of my career, I had this wonderful experience, and the thing I really want to emphasize is I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. When you have a dream, and the dream isn't something you dream and then it happens. The dream is something you never knew was going to come into your life. Dreams always come from behind you, not right between your eyes. It sneaks up on you. But when you have a dream, it doesn't often come at you screaming in your face, this is who you are. This is what you must be for the rest of your life. Sometimes a dream almost whispers. And I've always said to my kids, the hardest thing to listen to, your instincts, your human personal intuition, always whispers. It never shouts. Very hard to hear. So you have to, every day of your lives, be ready to hear what whispers in your ear. It very rarely shouts. And if you can listen to the whisper, and if it tickles your heart, and it's something you think you want to do for the rest of your life, then that is going to be what you do for the rest of your life, and we will benefit from everything you do. Thank you very much.
In this clip, we see him giving some advice on stage to a group of people. One of the things that he's talking about is that one of the drivers for him is receiving collective feedback from people. That is very important to him. But not only is it just feedback, the type of feedback that he's looking for is emotional feedback. Mm-hmm. He's looking for, what makes people cry, what makes them happy, what makes them excited, that kind of thing. So he's tracking a spectrum of emotions from other people, and that is what is very important to him. Now, later on, he goes to talk about the whisper, paying attention to the whisper, which tells you what you need to do for the rest of your life. This, how we interpreted it, it was feminine intuition and probably demon sleep for Steven. So the voice that sort of tells you what you're destined to do, what your direction is, what your DI is something that is quiet for him because it's a demon. And the intuition, which would also be giving him direction, is feminine. So that is the kind of intangible whisper that he's talking about in that clip there.
So far we know that Steven is Savior NE, and he's also Savior DE. And Holly already indicated what kind of DE it is. But let's take a look at the following clip to see what kind of feeling he has and how he processes his own feelings.
I'm not a brooding guy. I don't brood, and I'm optimistic, and I've always been that way. But also know how to embrace tragedy. I know how to embrace darkness. I've made a lot of movies that are very dark. So I know what it's like to deep dive into something like Schindler's List or like Saving Private Ryan or like Amistad. I know what it's like to go to the dark side, and I'm fine with that because I feel that's those messages are important to leave behind. But on something like this where there was so much variety that I've experienced in my life, I couldn't just focus on the darkness. I just wouldn't do that. It would have been a lie about how I feel.
It's really interesting what he says at the very end of the clip. He didn't want to lie about how he feels. So we know that Steven Spielberg isn't a director who shies away from really dark and serious topics, that he explored movies like Schindler's List or Saving Private Ryan, where he made also a lot of very fun movies like Jurassic Park. Steven really is aware of his own emotions and sees his emotions on a really large spectrum. So he knows he is not brooding, and that's all. And he wanted to express all of these things in his movies. So he might not be Savior FI or might not have FI anywhere in his deck.
I would work through my own trauma, because it was traumatic.
For making that film?
Sitting in that boat alone for hours. I would just sit in that boat alone for hours, just working through, and I would shake. I'd get in the boat and my hands would shake. And then I was fine, and 5-6 years went by. I hadn't seen the boat in 5 years. Decided to just come back and revisit it. It was gone. Somebody, unbeknownst to me or Sid Sheinberg, who ran the studio, had torn it up and just thrown it away, thrown the entire boat away. Because they said there was dry rot, there were termites. Well, of course there were termites and dry rot. I'm going to actually ask them to rebuild it and put it back here. I'm going to actually see if they'll do that. Because the tourists would love to see the orca.
So it was just a chance to kind of commune with that experience? And
and the experience was very good to me, as you know. The experience gave me complete freedom for the rest of my career. The amount of success the film enjoyed just gave me final cut. And gave me a chance to tell my own stories.
When I first saw this clip, I was really baffled and totally surprised about what he's saying in this calm savior state. So Steven went back to the Orca, to the original boat from Jaws, and sat on this boat, he says, for hours to process his own fear and negative emotions. And theoretically, anybody can do that, but like, how does he talk about that? Like, it seems like something obvious to do, so you get over your fear, you get over your own emotions. And that's definitely not how I would talk about something like that. Like, I think it would benefit me to do something similar, but I would make a big deal out of it. He doesn't do that in the moment. So he's really processing his emotions in a savior state. But also notice what else he talks about, that someone took this boat away like for reasons that didn't entirely make sense. So he's a bit upset that someone took away his known sensory that he has a history with.
So earlier we said that Steven is sort of playing the number one role in the film industry, but if you've watched a little bit of him by now, you can probably see that he doesn't have a huge amount of flex. He's just, dare I say it, too nice. Too nice. So the coin we're going to look at next is he a generalist or is he rather a specialist? So he is kind of playing the generalist role, being the director, sort of controlling everyone, setting the direction. But is that really kind of his natural sort of default state or his default drive? Let's take a look.
You produced an awful lot in the last 10 years, but I gather now at Amblin you're not going to do as much of that you've handed over to other people. Why is that?
Oh, well, you know, it wasn't satisfying for me. It just wasn't fun waking up in the morning going to work. It's like going to school. And the minute I always said to myself, the minute this job feels like going to school, I'm not doing it anymore. And producing became a bit academic, and I mean, it became a bit like going to a large institution and having to study for general education purposes subjects that I had absolutely, basically no interest in. And I also felt that I have a very tough time saying no to a director. I have a very, very tough time being very strong with other directors and saying you're wrong and the success or failure of the film depends on this one moment that I really believe that I'm right and you're wrong about. I don't believe in doing that, and it puts me in a very compromising position with directors who I love. And so I pretty much said, look, I can't do this anymore. I'll hire the director, and that'll be my failing or my success. And if the director is a good choice for that piece of material, it's his job. He goes all the way with it. It's his movie, and I'm out of it. And I pretty much turned over the company to Kathy Kennedy, and Frank Marshall, who run this company wonderfully, and they make a lot of the choices about what films are made, often without my name attached to it, just under the Amblin banner. I said to Kathy when I offered her the company, I said, I want to be able to work it. I want to be able to do 2 movies between '88 and '89. Within a 12-month calendar year, I want to physically direct 2 movies, and we did. We did Last Crusade and Always, and they both came out in 1989, and that was fun. I had a great time working. I had a wonderful time working. I'm going through my own, taking my time with my own life, my own personal life. I'm taking my time with that, and I'd like to do 2 films again within, let's say, at least 18 months, because I love being on the floor directing. It's sort of what I decided to do when I was 12 years old. I said, I'm going to be a movie director. I'd never said at 12, I'm going to be a movie producer. I never used the word producer until I was a businessman.
So not only was Steven a director, he was also a producer, and he actually founded a production company at some point. And he didn't like it because the work was no longer fun for him. So what he emphasizes in this video is that work does need to be fun. And as soon as it's not, which he does kind of liken it to education or going to school, as soon as it's not fun, he doesn't want to do it anymore. So he actually handed over his production company to someone else and went back to being the director because that was what he enjoyed. He also in this clip talks about how he doesn't like to argue with the directors, and he doesn't like to kind of force his opinion or his way of doing something onto other people, which I think you could also interpret that being savior friends, he doesn't like to put himself above others. He doesn't like in the hierarchy to be above others, and that makes him very uncomfortable, which is another reason he gives for wanting to go back to directing and handing over the producer role to someone else.
When Drew posed for Playboy,
yeah,
he sent you a quilt. And it said,
Cover up.
yep.
Because that's what parents do.
And Steven, then what happened?
Well, then I sent her the Playboy layout, and I had somebody from an artist come over and do paper doll cutout clothes, which I glued onto all of the partially exposed photographs and sent the whole thing back to Drew. Now she's dressed.
Yes.
And then about a week later, Drew sent me something. And I don't know if you have it there, but she sent me an apology.
That was my response to the Playboy. It's being covered up. Yep. Yep. And those are still like in one of your rooms in your house. Yes. Oh my God, there it is. Yep.
You're dressed as a nun.
What she said on the picture was, she said the first one was, "I'm sorry." The second one was, "I've seen the light." And the last frame is, I'm on my way.
You always just inspired me to be my best. And then you held both of my girls, my Olive and my Frankie. You know, Olive, right when she was born, she was so little and she fell asleep on your chest.
Remember.
And then you held Frankie, and you just, you know, I come over to your house and I'm just so glad to be a part of your life. And I love you, and you've had an incredible family. You know, I was like a first young person in your life.
You were my training wheels for fatherhood, Drew.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad, because you have such an amazing family.
Kate loves you to pieces, as you know. Kate adores you and has all these years.
You've just made such an incredible family that I love so much. And I love you and Kate, and I love when I'm at your home and hanging out, and it feels so comfortable, and yet it will never not feel so special, and I will always be grateful, because there's no way I'd be sitting here without you. Ever. I love you so much. And thank you for...
And thank you. And let me just say one thing, just a little more fatherly advice, but maybe more producerial advice. I want you to direct more. I loved Whip It so much. As you know, you came to my office and we sat in the screening room and you showed me a rough cut of your film for the first time. And then I loved Our Deal, Best Coast. The music video you made in 2000, and I think it was 9 or 2011. And I just think you're a gifted director, and I want to see you do that more.
I love you so much.
You continue to make me so proud, and I love you too, Drew. Happy birthday.
So if you watch the whole clip, it's a really, really cute and sweet conversation between Steven and Drew Barrymore that shows that their relationship is far beyond just a professional relationship. Steven is not really, but essentially acts like a godfather to her, invites her to her home. You see the banter between the two, and he even gives her some fatherly advice at the end because he really appreciated her past directing efforts. So he is not the kind of detached, overly professional specialist. He's not a flexer. He's really, save your friends, really very friendly, very inviting, and is interested into relationships that just go beyond this professional connection that he, of course, also has with her.
Steven's full type is audio, NEFE, play, consume, blast, sleep, and as we've said, he is a number 4. He is savor consume because, as we've seen, he does kind of take you along for the ride. He is a very good kind of natural storyteller, which is also something that we saw when we typed
Kate Winslet.
Kate Winslet, thank you. And he does prefer to base his stories on his own personal experience, even if they are kind of more fantasy based. And Steven is an extrovert, making him sleep last. He doesn't need to be kicked to talk. He can talk just fine. He also directs and has produced in the past. And he does tend to stretch himself too thin. So he talked about making multiple movies in 1 year, which is, something that an introvert would struggle to do. And, if you had sleep a little bit higher, you would definitely look at your future trajectory and say, maybe I won't do multiple movies in 1 year. Maybe that would be too much. So he didn't do that. He just made the movies and then realized that it was a little bit too much afterwards. So yeah, definitely sleep last there and infodom. Some of the biggest lessons that we learned from typing Steven is that you need to take the whole axis into account and make sure you do your cross checks, because otherwise you can get caught up in anecdotes like intuitives leave the planet. As we've seen, Stephen doesn't really do that. I mean, masculine sensory does help. And the other thing is that demon DIs will still do their DI, but they still have to qualify what they want, and they can't help but talk through other people's perspectives, even if they do kind of, in the end up on what they wanted originally. So while Stephen is a number 4, he has actually managed to kind of get to the top in his field. He is a critically acclaimed director in the film industry, and even though he didn't want to produce because it wasn't fun for him, he was still actually able to produce, direct, write. So he was able to do kind of everything within his kind of arena, I suppose. And I think needing to balance out the sleep and the blast in order to be good at what he needed to do, he had to actually do sleep, he had to do blast, and that has overall made him pretty balanced for his type.